So we will have presentations from Mary Beth Reedner and from Ginny Mazer and Jamie Jensen. And then we will have at least 20 minutes, maybe a little bit more, depending how it goes, where I'd really like to talk about how we are all coping with COVID-19, because it is a situation that's evolving on a daily basis. Here in Massachusetts now, the senior centers have closed, and many cafes are canceling their activities or are really on the fence, not knowing how to handle this. And I know this is the case all over the country. So I'm very pleased that some of the participants today do have experience with holding virtual activities and creatively using other resources to reach people who may not be able to come in and congregate together. So I'm hoping we can spend that last section of the meeting really putting our heads together a bit about how to cope with this quickly changing situation. So there is a chat box, and please feel free at any point to send a message there. I will also be unmuting the phones at different points so that we can hear from you. I want to ask your indulgence and patience, just because I am still learning how to use this technology, and this is by far the biggest virtual group we've had, since typically we've had about half of the participants here in Waltham, and we can't do that today because of the virus. So with that said, I'm going to share my screen where we can get to the slides. So hopefully you can see those. So today is March 12th. We did talk a little bit about the agenda, and our next meeting will be Wednesday, June 10th, again from 1:30 to 3:30 Eastern Standard Time. We alternate between Wednesdays and Thursdays so that it gives people who have their cafes on one day or another the chance to participate. So a little housekeeping. I don't think we're having a problem with this, but just a reminder, please make sure not to use both your computer speakers and your phone, because then we get an echo. If you do have a webcam and you want us to see you, you can activate that option. And this meeting is recorded. I will post the recording on our Percolator webpage in approximately 1 to 2 weeks. So roll call. So I had made a list of the towns that are represented on today's call. These are in Massachusetts. And I know that I'm missing some because there are other people who RSVP'd later and I didn't get them on the list, but we've got a wonderful list. Beautiful Massachusetts. And then beautiful everywhere else. We've got an amazing group of people with us today from many states, and also from Nova Scotia in Canada. And I apologize if I don't have you listed here, but we are so happy to have you all with us. Thank you for taking the time. So I'm going to open the phones up and see if anybody wants to make a quick announcement, and I do ask that you keep it brief. But if you have some big news about your cafe or a burning question, please go ahead. And if it's a question relating to the virus, hold on, because we'll address that towards the end of the meeting. So I'm going to go ahead and open the phones. Let's see how I do that. Let's see. Apologies. This is interesting. Maybe I have to, oh, here we go. More controls. Manage participants, that's it. Unmute all. All right, so now thank you. So would anyone like to make a announcement? We'll just give it a moment. Okay, so I will go ahead and mute the phone so that we don't have background sound. And if at any point you would like to ask a question, make a comment, or if you're having difficulty hearing, anything like that, please just type it into the chat box and I will be monitoring that. So I'm going to go ahead and continue with the slides. And let's see. So a couple of quick updates from our Massachusetts Memory Cafe network. So here in Massachusetts, there are now 127 cafes. Very happy that the island of Nantucket just started a cafe after quite a bit of really hard work on that. So congratulations to them. We have now 3 cafes in Spanish, 2 in Portuguese, 1 in Chinese, and you can find the list of all memory cafes in our state at the URL here. Please contact me if you have any changes at any point. And today we are in the process of adding a message at the top of our directory, urging people to check with the cafe contact person to see if there's been a cancellation. Just a reminder for everyone anywhere in the country, the Percolator webpage is the home where you can find all of our main resources, including our Memory Cafe Toolkit in English and Spanish. And we do have a Google group as well. You should all have received an invitation, and feel free to let me know if you didn't. When you receive that invitation, you can choose to accept or decline it. If you accept it, then you're part of a group where you can post questions and hear from cafe people all around the country, and some from other countries as well. So just one last thing, some of the Percolator emails don't go through because different servers reject them. I find that the town government servers are especially stringent that way. So if you're not getting emails from me, you may need to ask your email administrator to put our email extension on what's called your whitelist. But you can always follow up with me if you need to. And at any point, if you have topic requests for surveys or quarterly meeting discussions, please feel free to let me know. So that's it for housekeeping. And what I would love to do now is to bring Mary Beth here to the fore. Okay, good, she's unmuted. And I will let Mary Beth take it away. Oops. Mary Beth, are you able to talk to us now?
Can you not hear me?
Okay.
Can you hear me now?
Let me try to, I'm going to try to mute everybody but you, okay? All right, now I'm going to try to unmute. Why won't it let me do that? Let's see. Okay, it looks like I can't unmute just you, Mary Beth, so let's see. I'm not sure where we're getting all that. I can hear you, but all right, why don't you try going ahead, Mary Beth. Oh, so let me introduce you. I'm sorry. So I'm delighted to have Mary Beth Riedner here today. Mary Beth resigned from her position as university librarian for Roosevelt University in Chicago, Illinois, and that was in 2008. And that was to care for her husband, who had a young onset dementia. So this is something that Mary Beth came to through personal hard-won experience. And for the past 6 years, she has served on the leadership team of the American Library Association's interest group for Alzheimer's and related disorders, which has the acronym IGARD. She is the developer of the award-winning Tales and Travel book and reading program designed for those living with dementia. And she is involved with the National Dementia Friendly America Initiative, as well as dementia-friendly efforts emerging in Illinois and Arizona. She has presented all around the country and is the author of several journal articles and book chapters. So we are delighted to benefit from her expertise here. So Mary Beth, take it away.
Okay, I hope you can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you.
Great, okay. Thank you, Beth, for your very kind introduction. And thank you for this opportunity to talk with this Percolator group about how books and reading and what I now call literacy activities can be used to improve the quality of life for those living with dementia. So this is my late husband, Steve. He is my personal hero. He was diagnosed in 2006 at the age of 58 with a younger onset dementia called primary progressive aphasia, or PPA, which is a type of frontotemporal dementia. You may already know that PPA is a rather rare form of dementia that affects the language parts of the brain. As I watched him courageously travel his 10-year-plus journey through this disease, I learned firsthand how deeply people living with dementia want to retain their identity and self-esteem throughout the course of the disease. Next slide, please. So one nice thing about talking to a group such as yours is that I don't have to start at the very beginning. When I talk to librarians, I usually have to spend quite a bit of time giving them background information about dementia. So I'm happy to list here these things that I don't have to tell you, because you probably already know them. I don't have to tell you that 5.8 million people are living with dementia in the US today, and that there are probably 3 times that number of unpaid care partners. I don't have to tell you how this number is expected to increase rapidly in the near future. I don't have to tell you that the term dementia is actually an umbrella term, and that there are many types of dementia, with Alzheimer's disease being the most common. You already know that those living with dementia slowly progress through several stages, and that they can remain highly functional during the early and middle stages. I don't need to tell you that each person with dementia is unique due to their own personal experiences and to the progress of the disease through their brain. I don't have to give you tips on how to interact and communicate with those living with dementia. And you probably already know that most people with a dementia diagnosis are living in the community, not in a residential facility. You are also aware that most of the general public is still uneducated about dementia, and that there remains a strong stigma attached to a diagnosis of dementia. And of course, you already know about the Dementia Friendly America, or DFA movement, and that memory cafes are a wonderful resource for combating stigma and providing a sense of inclusion and community for those living with dementia and their care partners. I'm really telling you all these things so that you know that I know about them. Next slide, please.
Mary Beth, I'm just going to pause for a moment and ask if everyone except for Mary Beth could just mute your phone or your audio, please, because we're getting some background sound. Thank you.
Okay, another thing that I am hoping that you're already knowing about is that libraries can play a vital and important role in the dementia-friendly effort. In fact, there is a DFA sector guide for libraries that outlines a wide variety of ways that librarians can add value to the dementia-friendly movement. Perhaps some of you are librarians, but if you haven't looked at this already, I hope that you will take a few minutes to review it later. A link to it is available on the resources handout for this webinar. Next slide, please. Many libraries across the country, and no doubt some in Massachusetts, are already putting some of the ideas included in the sector guide into practice. For example, many libraries across the country have already eagerly accepted their role as providers of educational programs on the topics of Alzheimer's disease and caregiving. These programs are usually provided by outside organizations such as the Alzheimer's Association. Next slide, please. Some libraries have developed special collections for caregivers. Other libraries create special displays during Alzheimer's Awareness Month. Next. Some libraries are offering meeting space to caregiver support groups and to memory cafes. These are all wonderful activities that are important and should be continued, but please notice that the audience addressed by most of these services tend to be either the general public or caregivers. What about the person living with dementia? Next, please. You are all no doubt aware of the growing number of non-pharmacological interventions, as they're called, that are being used to improve the quality of life for those living with dementia. You're probably already incorporating music and art activities into your Memory Cafe program. You may already be using other engaging activities such as exercise or movement therapy, drama therapy, or nature and pet therapy during your program. But have you ever thought about enlisting the aid of your local libraries to design book, reading, and other literacy activities to add to your program repertoire? Next, please. One common stereotype that people have about those living with dementia is the belief that they can no longer read. This is a misconception, and research bears this out. Michelle S. Bourgeois, a professor at the University of South Florida, states, "All my research demonstrates that people who were literate maintain their ability to read until the end stages of dementia." The University of Liverpool has also found that reading group activities produced, and I'm quoting, "a significant reduction in dementia symptoms and make a contribution to well-being." Next, please.
Could I just ask again, I'm sorry, Mary Beth, could I just ask again that people who are not Mary Beth, just take a moment to mute your phone so that we don't get background noise. Thank you. Please go ahead, Mary Beth.
Okay. So I have seen these results myself personally. In 2008, I started delivering a program that I designed called Tales and Travel as a volunteer at a local memory care facility. Tales and Travel was originally designed for individuals in the early or mid stages of dementia who were living in residential facilities. At that time, memory cafes were not yet in existence, at least not in the US. Tales and Travel takes participants on an imaginary trip to another country or part of the United States. It uses library materials to engage them both socially and cognitively. In 2011, I found some very enthusiastic partners in the librarians at the Gail Borden Public Library in Elgin, Illinois. And we started bringing the program to about a dozen memory care facilities in the Elgin area. I have since brought the program to memory cafes in the Phoenix area, where I have been spending winters since my husband passed in 2014. The Tales and Travel program is designed to offer opportunities for active participation. It's not a travelogue lecture with pictures flashed on a screen that turns the attendees into passive observers. The program tries to focus on remaining abilities, not on losses. And that means not making assumptions about participants' reading abilities, not underestimating them. Next, please. There is a Tales and Travel website that provides a free toolkit for librarians or any other interested parties such as yourselves to replicate the program in their own communities. It includes a video of the program in action, as well as 12 sample excursion guides and 31 stories made freely available through a Creative Commons license. And I'll be talking about that again later. Next, please. We've also created a facilitation checklist to ensure that anyone replicating the program would understand how it was designed to be conducted. You should have all received a handout of this checklist as a part of this webinar. The first section shown here addresses the objectives of the program, which are to encourage active participation in the activities, to allow each person to engage at their own pace and level of ability, to stimulate cognitive abilities such as memory and reading ability, to stimulate conversation and social interaction, and to foster feelings of competence and well-being. Next, please. I was really pleased a few years ago to find the person-centered care model that was developed by the Alzheimer's Society in the United Kingdom. Over the years, I had developed many of these same guiding principles for conducting Tales and Travel, especially the last two key points that are shown here. They overlap a lot with the objectives of the Tales and Travel program. promoting conversations and relationships with other people, and ensuring that they can try new things, like learning about other countries, or take part in activities that they enjoy, such as reading or browsing through a book. Next, please. So how does Tales and Travel work? First of all, we found it's important to build trust and rapport with the participants using welcoming body language and tone of voice. Oh, by the way, there are usually several library or memory care facility staff or volunteers in the room, so I will be using the word we a lot. So we greet each person as they come into the room by smiling, looking them in the eye, and introducing ourselves and asking their name, getting down to their level if they are seated. We then show them individually where we are on a globe or a large map, and then trace with the finger to where the destination lies. This can be made fun and fanciful by talking about packing bags and getting on an imaginary airplane. We always see people at tables that are either pulled together or arranged in a U shape so that they can see each other and the books can lay flat. That eliminates the problem of holding a book and makes it easier for them to turn the pages and examine pictures and text. Each person gets a packet with all the materials for the program, which they can keep. Next, please. We then invite them to take turns reading out loud from a folktale, legend, or myth associated with the chosen location, in this case, Mexico, which are often taken from a children's folktale collection. Or, as I mentioned earlier, the Tales and Travel website has stories from over 30 countries with these Creative Commons licenses that allow you to freely use them for your own programming. The stories are typed in large font to make them easier to read and to maintain the dignity of these adult readers. So I start by asking a volunteer to begin reading. Shyness, not an inability to read, may be the reason they don't volunteer right away. If no one volunteers, I start reading the first paragraph with a lot of expression and enthusiasm, and I then invite someone by name to read the next paragraph. Frequently, that's all it takes to get the ball rolling. I would estimate that 8 out of 10 participants agree to read out loud. Those who don't choose to read aloud follow along with the printed text or listen quietly. You can tell from chuckles at funny parts or clucking sounds when something sad happens that they are attending to the content of the story. Some readers like to really ham it up, especially if there's dialogue. Observers such as residential facility staff and even care partners are often surprised by their reading abilities. At a recent Memory Cafe program, a staff member warned me ahead of time that so-and-so would probably not be able to participate. But lo and behold, when they were asked to read by name, they read fluently. Small miracles like this happen all the time. Next, please. We then share 5 interesting facts with them, again, inviting them to take turns reading them out loud. At this point in the program, it's easier to find volunteer readers as they are more comfortable with what is going on. Usually all it takes is asking someone by name if they would like to read. As they read the facts, we often hear comments such as, "I didn't know that," or "Isn't that amazing?" Next, please.
There's still some background noise, so I apologize, Mary Beth, to interrupt, but please, if you could all mute your phones. I'm hearing typing. Please mute your phone. Thank you.
We then distribute books, carefully selected from both the adult and children's collection, for them to browse through. The most important criteria is that the books be richly illustrated with color photographs. We try to bring as many books as there are participants. The participants browse through the books at their own pace, often pausing to examine a picture or read some of the text. As people finish a book, we trade among them. They often browse through 3 or more books. Next. So, what kind of books do we use? From the adult collection, we choose coffee table books and selected travel guides with large photos. We avoid those travel books with dense text about hotels or restaurants and attractions and with those tiny pictures. Next, please. We also select books from the nonfiction collection devoted to a special topic about the region, such as cooking, historical events, or art and architecture. These can engage the attention of participants as long as they contain large, clear photographs. Next, please. It's actually sometimes hard to find appropriate books in the adult collection. For example, these are the only two that I found in my local libraries for a recent trip to Canada. One is a beautiful coffee table book about Canadian national parks, and the other was a cookbook with recipes using maple syrup. I thought this was appropriate because of the close association between maple trees and Canada. Next, please. But the children's collection is a tremendous resource for the Tales and Travel program. As a former children's librarian, I have a lot of respect for books written for children. There are numerous publishers of series on countries of the world and individual U.S. states that junior high and middle school students use to write country reports that are very engaging for Tales and Travel participants. Next, please. Here are some examples of books at the middle school level that I used for our trip to Canada. Next. Finally, it's important to base the choice of materials on the person's current abilities. Unfortunately, as dementia progresses, people do continually lose abilities. Therefore, it might be wise to select some materials more appropriate for lower levels of abilities. For example, primary level children's books that are shorter, with more white space and simpler vocabulary might be more appropriate as people enter the later stages. Next, please. Here are a few primary level books that I selected for our Canada trip. As you can see, there's animals, nature, things like that that might be more engaging. Next, please. Children's books are readily accepted by the participants when they are chosen to respect the dignity of this adult audience. It's important to make wise choices from the children's collection, even at the primary level. You can still find many books at this level with colorful photographs. I tend to avoid books with cartoon-like illustrations or childish drawings. Next. As they browse, we circulate among them, engaging them in conversation by pointing out a picture of something we talked about earlier, asking a question, or helping someone turn pages or exchange books. Often participants want to talk about memories from their own lives stimulated by the book's content. Sometimes they just want to talk about unrelated things. Participants often talk among themselves as well. This type of socialization is an extremely important part of the program. Next, please. Supplementary materials include music, souvenirs or artifacts from the destination, coloring pages, and food. These materials make the program multi-sensory. Next, please. As I mentioned briefly earlier, after my husband passed away in 2014, I started spending winters in Arizona to be near one of my sons and his family. In 2015, I attended the first dementia-friendly summit for the city of Tempe, Arizona. 2 years later, I started bringing my Tales and Travel program once a month to the Memory Café at the Tempe Public Library. Recently, I was invited to begin presenting the program at the Sun Lakes, Arizona Memory Café. Both of these cafes meet weekly, and after an initial joint gathering for coffee, the attendees break into two groups. One is a support group for care partners, and the other is an activity program for those living with dementia. Care partners can choose to stay with their loved one for the activity if they prefer, but in reality, only a few do that. As I understand it, each memory cafe can decide for itself how it wants to operate, and I believe that this is not the model that you use most frequently in Massachusetts, but it is working well for the Arizona Memory Cafes. The program usually has an attendance rate of about 50 to 60 people every week. The Memory Cafe program lasts a half hour longer than my original program at residential facilities, so I had to add some additional literacy activities to keep the participants actively engaged for the full 75 minutes. Next, please. I realize that music is a powerful way to engage those living with dementia. I love to sing myself, and I appreciate how much joy it can bring to everyone. But I also know that I can't remember all the words to all the songs, so why should we expect those living with dementia to remember them? I also wanted to combine music with literacy somehow, and the obvious solution was to provide the group with written lyrics to help facilitate singing. Finding songs from different countries of the world has become sort of a challenge in itself. I find myself reverting to popular music rather than to authentic songs from the actual countries. It's a compromise, but it gets people singing. For example, when we visited Brazil, we chose the song The Girl from Ipanema, and it turned out to be a good choice. An internet search showed that this song was actually used during the opening and closing ceremonies for the 2016 Olympics, which were held in Brazil. I also found these pictures of the actual woman who inspired the writers of the song. She's at age 17 on the left and 71 at the right. She was asked to carry the torch during the closing ceremony. Now, the only instrument that I play is the flute. So I do what probably no one else in the world does. I accompany the singers with my flute. I usually play through the song once so they can refresh their memories about the tune, and then I play it again and they all join in and can sing all the words, not just the chorus, because they are right there in front of them. This is turning out to be one of the most enjoyable parts of the program. Live music like this is helpful because I can adapt the pace of the song to fit their abilities, and I can stop and start if needed. While not everyone can play an instrument, you might be surprised at how many members of your Memory Cafe community might be willing to play a few songs on their keyboard, guitar, or even an instrument like a clarinet or a flute. Everyone also really appreciates hearing an actual instrument being played. At the end of each song, we always applaud each other. Next, please. Reading of poetry is another way to combine reading with another beautiful, evocative literary art form. Perhaps some of you are familiar with Gary Glazner and his Alzheimer's Poetry Project. I attended a workshop that he gave and have incorporated some of his techniques into the Tales and Travel program. One method he suggests is choral reading, where we all read the poem out loud together. This has turned out to be quite successful as no one is put on the spot. We read this poem about the Corcovado mountain during our trip to Brazil. It was written in the mid-1800s, long before the statue of Christ the Redeemer was built on it. But the poem draws a beautiful word picture about this mountain, which the poet calls sublime, foreshadowing the decision to build that statue on this amazing hilltop. We also use call and response, another Gary Glazner technique, where I read a line of a poem and the group repeats it after me. Again, finding poems that fit the chosen location can be challenging, but the internet is an amazing resource. Next, please. As a concluding activity, I pass out coloring pages related to the chosen country that I have again found on the internet. Here are some examples from the Canada trip. As I'm not very crafty, this has turned out to be a simple solution to give the participants another type of modality to engage in. I provide colored pencils instead of crayons or markers, which seems to be a bit more childish. I'm surprised by how many of the men actually get into this, especially when I remind them that adult coloring books are all the rage now. During this quiet activity, I sometimes play music from the destination country. At this point, the care partners usually finish their discussions and come to pick up their loved ones. I thank everyone for traveling with me and say goodbye to them as they leave. I remind them that they can take home the packets with the stories, facts, poems, and songs, as well as the coloring pages, and most of them do. It's my hope that they will interact with these materials later with their care partners or other friends or family. Next. Before I close, I'd like to make it clear that the Tales and Travel program, while successful and easy to replicate, is only the tip of the iceberg of ways to reach out to persons with dementia through books, reading, and other literacy activities. I hope I have demonstrated that literacy activities are another tool that can be added to your toolkit to engage and stimulate those who come to your memory cafes. You might want to experiment by incorporating one or two literacy activities into your existing program. The only limit is the creativity, abilities, and energy of those of you conducting the program. Oh, and one last thing that I don't have to tell you is that working with those living with dementia is truly very rewarding. They are all just people like you and me who want to be valued as human beings, treated with respect, and given opportunities to participate in life as much as possible. Those of us working with this deserving population know that even if they can no longer respond with thanks or even a smile, we have done something important that has brightened their day and improved the quality of their lives. Next, please. As a final note, I'd like to tell you that Tales of Travel has been awarded several grants and awards. In 2014, it received the Rosalind Gilbert Innovations in Alzheimer's Disease Caregiving Legacy Award, that's the mouthful, in the Creative Expression category. This award is coordinated by the Family Caregiver Alliance in California and was presented at the American Society on Aging Conference. In 2018, Tales of Travel was again highlighted in an update of Gilbert Award winners, as shown here. And this next slide shows that in, yeah, you can go on. In 2017, the Tales of Travel was selected by the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C. as one of the 15 best practice honorees identified across the country as part of its annual Literacy Award. Literacy awards are usually given to programs for children or adults who never learned to read. And so we were very pleased that the Library of Congress recognized that maintaining and preserving literacy among those living with dementia was a worthwhile venture that added to their mission of universal literacy. Next. So here are some professional library resources that you can go to for more information or that you might want to share with your local librarians. One is the link to the IGARD interest group that Beth mentioned at the beginning, the Alzheimer's and Related Dementias interest group from the American Library Association. And another important document is called the Guidelines for Library Services to Persons with Dementia that were developed by an International Federation of Library Associations, or IFLA. So links to these resources are included in the handouts for this webinar. I'd like to thank you for your time and attention, and if anyone has any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you so much, Mary Beth. That was really wonderful. I've been aware of Tales and Travel Memories for a long time, but it was just so helpful to really get more detail and be able to picture how it can be used at memory cafes, along with the other concepts and resources that you shared with us. So we do have some time now. If anyone has a question or a comment for Mary Beth, I'm going to unmute the lines. And so, some of you have muted yourselves, as I had asked you to. Thank you for doing that. But if you want to make a comment, you can feel free to unmute yourself and go ahead and do that right now.
This is Susan. Can you hear me?
We can hear you, Susan. Hi, Susan.
Okay, I was just going to tell you that, well, first of all, I really appreciate this as somebody who loves libraries. And it's just great to know about librarians who are responding so positively to people living with dementia. So I was going to tell you about something that we did in a memory cafe a while ago. We had a memory cafe book club gathering. So we decided that we would ask people to bring their favorite books, but we defined books very broadly. And so we said, oh, it could be your favorite cookbook, or it could be a book with your collection of baseball cards, or a book with pictures from your vacation, or it could be what we usually think of as a book. We really had a lot of fun with it. People went around the room and they showed each other their books and they passed them around and they talked about why these had been so important to them. So we haven't done that for a while, and this webinar is making me think we need to do it again.
Thank you, Susan.
That's terrific. Can I steal that idea?
That's what this forum is all about, is to encourage everyone to steal ideas from each other and expand upon them and adapt them. Does anyone else have either a question or something they'd like to share about literacy materials at their own memory cafe or their own program?
I see that some people typed some comments, some questions in the chat section.
Thank you. I appreciate the crowdsourcing of this process because I am really not so good at this. Let's see. How do I get back to the chat box? Show thumbnail video back up here. More. Where do you see? Oh, thank you. All right, great. How do you engage everyone at the same time if they're at different levels? That's a great question.
Okay, so people are given an opportunity to choose whether or not to read the story or not, and you would be amazed at how attentive they are. I really think people are really underestimating people with dementia. And they're interested in the story, they're respectful of each other, they take turns, they, and they don't interrupt or do anything, that, you might have expected that they would do. So the story goes really quite smoothly. All of the out loud reading goes quite well. And then when we pass around the books, we do try to, if we see that someone is, obviously not at a highly functional stage, we'll give them one of the books that is more geared for the primary level children, or have one of the volunteers come and sit with them and help them. So I kind of just let it go. It's a free-for-all once we pass out the book. It's like 15 minutes or something. They just look at the book, they talk to each other. I'm in the middle of that U shape, and I go around and try to engage everyone somehow. And it's really, you'd be surprised at how easy it is to engage them. It's a manipulative, I think people do, when they have a manipulative in their hands, they're more engaged to begin with. So everyone gets something, and they're finding pictures of animals, they're finding maps. I can't tell you how much they enjoy maps. I had a book for Wayne Gretzky when we went to Canada. This one man came with a page where all of the different lingo is called, face-offs and fast breaks and things like that. And he was just, he was like quizzing me. It's amazing how simple this is to engage them with it. And they aren't supposed to necessarily all do the same thing at the same time, which I think is a nice part of this program, that people can go at their own pace. I hope that answers your question.
That's great, thank you. And here's another question from Bob, which is, what might be the best ratio of Café volunteers to attendees?
Yeah, you're probably already trying to deal with that. I would say we usually have maybe, for a group of maybe 1 to 5 or 6 would be helpful if you can do that. If not, it really doesn't take a whole lot of volunteer help. But that's what we usually end up with the Memory Cafe already. There's 2 librarians who do it at Tempe, and the Memory Cafe in Sun Lakes we have myself, and then they have like 3 volunteers from the cafe who stay.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Mary Beth. And Susie is asking whether you ask the caregivers to leave, or how you accomplish that.
No, I do not ask them to leave, and I don't actually run that part. So people just kind of have gotten used to this now, and when they get the high sign from the leader of the support group, they just say goodbye to their loved one and move on. And everyone's comfortable staying in the room now, so it's not. Those who maybe aren't comfortable do have their loved ones stay, or their care partners stay with them. One thing I have noticed, though, is that if the people are on their own, they might shine a little bit more than if they had their care partner next to them. They won't have to turn to them for like guidance. They're making decisions on their own, whether or not they want to read, whether they want to look at this book or that book or talk to their neighbor. They're not directed by their care partner. And as a former caregiver, I realized that they, sometimes turn to us too often, and that they can do more than they even realize themselves. So that's just
that's a great point. And as you had said earlier, Mary Beth, memory cafes are designed in all different kinds of ways, and it's really up to that group to decide what makes sense for them. And so there are cafes that offer a separate space for the care partners as what you're describing, which is, it's optional to do that, but some care partners will take advantage of that. And that's a really interesting point you're raising about how that can give the person living with dementia more space to actually spread their wings. Angela, who is also in a library system here, chats about including the care partners along with the person living with dementia. That's the case in almost all the cafes in Massachusetts. So it varies, and there is no right or wrong here. And I also wanted to mention we had a chat from Kim at the Millis Public Library here in Massachusetts that they just started their memory cafe in January, which is great. So it's been wonderful to see a lot of cafes actually launched by library staff and held at libraries, and also to see many, many cafes that are held in other settings, collaborating closely with the library. And that was something, this is Beth, that I was thinking about as you were presenting, Mary Beth, is that this would be a wonderful kind of program to really work on closely with your town librarian. If you are not that librarian, but to really partner because that person really knows what's in the collection. And I remember we had a presentation a couple of quarters ago at the Percolator by a team of librarians running a cafe in Shrewsbury, Massachusetts. And one of the points they made is that if you're starting a new memory cafe and you're not in a library, the library should be one of your first stops, to let them know you're starting this program and how can you collaborate, because the library is a wonderful partner to help get the word out. And I think with regard to these kind of literary programs, they would be wonderful partners to really help shape the activities as well. Do you have any thoughts about that, Mary Beth?
Yeah, I think that's a terrific idea, obviously. I was really glad when DFA included a sector guide for libraries, so including us in the community, which is sort of an overlooked at the beginning. So, libraries have so many things, so many different topics focused on almost anything in the world that you can come up with. I remember encountering a group of down in Effingham, Illinois, which is southern rural Illinois, and they got the library to give them books at their, I guess it was a facility that asked the library to collect books on how to train your horse. And they had a stack of books, and they did a program on that because that's something that they obviously were familiar with, from their youth. So any topic that you can think of, there's going to be a book in the library, and it might be an asset to the program.
It's great. I wonder if you ever have people who speak different languages attending, and if you can make translated materials available if needed.
Yeah, libraries are very sensitive to their community and usually have collections of books in different languages. So I personally have not done that, but I know that libraries usually have collections of materials that would be helpful. And there's also for people learning English as a second language, they usually have collections of books there too. So they're high interest, low vocabulary types of books that might be useful. So libraries really try to serve their community and try to be sensitive to the needs of their community. I think they would be excellent partners for you to seek out.
That's great. Does anyone else have a comment or a question for Mary Beth? Okay, I'm going to suggest that everyone stand up and shake your arms and legs. Just move around, get the blood flowing. There we go. We're all friends here. We don't have to stand on ceremony. That's excellent. Okay. And let's hear it for Mary Beth. Thank you so much. That was really beautiful. Very inspiring.
Thank you very much.
So the slides are available, and I will also make sure that those handouts are available for anybody who may not have gotten them. And so now I want to turn the floor over to my friends Ginny Mazer and Jamie Jensen. Let me just pivot back to our slideshow here. And let's see, show thumbnail video. Yep, you're all being very patient with me as I awkwardly navigate using Zoom. But I am quite delighted to introduce Ginny and Jamie. Jamie is a social worker at the Brookline Council on Aging. And Ginny is the Community and Academic Arts Advisor at Goddard House Assisted Living, also in the community of Brookline, which is just borders Boston, Massachusetts. So I'm going to navigate the slides for the two of you, but I'll let you take it away. Yes, absolutely. So Ginny is joining us with the use of CART, which is an assistive interpretation for a person who is deaf. And we have Donna Wells providing CART transcription. And so it may be that there's a little bit of a lag if one of you has a question, just because Ginny is watching the translation on her screen. Yeah? Okay, great. Thank you. So I'll let you take it away.
So I'm going to be talking about Café to start, and then we'll get into the camp, and Ginny will join me for that. So fun. So just to give you a little history about the Café, I started joining the Percolator back when it started in 2014. The Brookline Senior Center paired with a local temple for the first one in 2015. And since then, it's been just at the Senior Center regularly once a month. We usually meet on the fourth Wednesday from 1:30 to 3. However, that does vary depending on holidays or conflicting senior center events. As you can imagine, being in a shared community center space, we do have some competition at times with other programs. And because of that, generally I like to meet in our large ballroom space that we have available. However, and we also have to meet in a basement space that's a bit smaller, again, depending on competition with other programs. I don't like this as much because it's not as easy a setup to do, and it can't necessarily accommodate for as many people as the large ballroom space can. And other folks, my volunteers have agreed with me on this as well. So we generally get between 15 and 20 participants, sometimes as many as 30, both participants with memory loss and their care partners, either by themselves or with each other. But what's nice is being part of a community center, we tend to get a lot of folks coming who don't have memory loss at all or aren't caring for someone with memory loss. They're just part of our regular senior center crowd who just come to enjoy it. And I'm okay with this because I really do believe that it helps with helping people with memory loss and their caregivers be part of our community. So that's been very helpful to have that. I can do it if it's easier. Okay. So we do welcome participants at the door. If we know who people are, or even if we don't, we'll introduce them to some of our regular participants who happen to come a lot of the time, and we'll suggest seating accordingly. Like, for example, I have a lot of couples who come where there's a gentleman caregiver caregiving for a wife with memory loss. So if I see them coming, I'll hopefully have seating accordingly for them with other people in their similar situation, other couples. So that way they get to meet each other and be able to share their similar experiences.
Pause for a second and mute all the phone lines so that we don't have background. Okay. You can tell that school is out. All right, there we go.
Oh, actually, I'm going back one. Sorry.
I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. I can do that. That's easier.
That's fine. Yeah.
So usually I have volunteers who are there who are helping out, and they are really great with interacting with the guests that we have. And they also help in leading what I call icebreakers. I have little printed out questions on the tables and in front of the chairs. Things like, what was your first date, or what did you do for work, or what would you do as your first act if you were president? Things like that to really get conversations moving. And people really seem to enjoy that, and there's a lot of fun that we can have with a lot of those questions. So that part usually happens from 1:30 to 2. And there's always refreshments available as part of that, so that's more of the conversation time. And then from 2 to 3, we have an interactive guest artist who leads the program. And I've listed everything we've had in the many years we've had down below there, a lot of whom we've had repeated times every year because we know people really enjoy what we offer. I would say music, anything related to music is probably a big highlight because people love to dance. I'm going to show a few photos later that will display this. In terms of funding, we are very lucky to have use of our Senior Center's multi-purpose fund, which funds the majority of our programs at the center. So we have use of that, as well as, of course, the administrative piece of the program. We can use what's available through the Senior Center in terms of, paper, etc., but also some of the amenities such as coffee and tea, and things like that. Leftover snacks we have sometimes for other events that we can use for the refreshments. We have used some grants from time to time. We also generally have local sponsors who have generously offered to sponsor, let's say, either a guest artist or refreshments or both. And we've been very thankful to a lot of our local organizations who have come together to help us with this. We're very appreciative to them. In terms of advertising, we have our Senior Center newsletter, the Brookline tab. I post flyers all over the Senior Center and in local senior housing, etc. I do have a mass email list that I send out twice a month, reminders. And of course, word of mouth is certainly a big one. And I also have a reminder call list that I'll do closer to the date as well. We also get a lot of participants from our next door neighbor senior housing. And a lot of their staff have been very helpful with reminding their residents. And also, of course, our partnership with Goddard House Assisted Living, we've had folks come from there as well. And thanks to Jenny for her help with that. We also have, as I mentioned, our volunteers who are very helpful. I have 6 regular volunteers, and they're actually our seniors themselves who are part of our community, and they just love it. They really get a lot out of it themselves. And we also have student interns as well who join us from various social work schools, etc., throughout the year. And it's great to have that as an intergenerational piece. And also in terms of the tasks that they do, the help with directing people, and it's really a party for them, and they really enjoy it. And there's a lot of logistical things that they help with, certainly with the setup and cleanup, but it's mostly just being there and being part of the whole event. In terms of evaluations, I do have the evaluation sheets, that I've gotten from Beth through the Percolator network, modified for our purposes. We have those available on our resource table at the entrance to the event. So people are welcome to use those if they want, but certainly not required. Generally, I do get a lot of verbal feedback, especially as participants also come generally for other programs. So I see them around the Senior Center, and they'll say, oh, well, what's up next for next month's Memory Cafe? And people are really excited about that. And then, of course, there's observations. I can really see, and you'll see in the pictures, pictures speak 1,000 words in terms of people's enjoyment of it. Just in terms of benefits and challenges, with challenges, as I mentioned, when it's in the smaller space, it's very hard to navigate that. But hopefully I've learned some tricks and tools over time when we are in that space. And of course, like any event, you can't please everyone. Sometimes there's guest artists that just aren't the best fit for particular participants who we have. They might not enjoy, let's say it's art therapy, but the guest artists are really good with trying to engage people as much as possible in that activity. And of course, like with any event, there's always logistical issues. But in terms of the benefits certainly outweigh the challenges. The biggest ones to me are laughter, smiles, and humor. They all sort of go together. And of course, friendships being formed. As I mentioned, when people find people with similar situations to them, they're able to form friendships outside of the monthly event, which is wonderful, especially where it is only monthly. And people, as I said, look forward to the next event, which is wonderful. So just to give you all some images, again, put faces to the names here that I'm saying. These are from all over the past couple of years and just gives you a sense of the vibrancy and enjoyment that people are having with the event. If I'm going too fast, please let put something in the chat box, but leave this for a moment. As I mentioned, dancing is certainly a big one. A lot of conga lines.
Does the dancing happen spontaneously?
Yes. And also the volunteers, thank you, Ginny, for the question, because volunteers are actually very helpful with helping to facilitate some of that. They'll get people up out of their chairs and dancing around, which is lovely. And just something that Beth asked if I would touch on is language and cultural diversity. For those of you who are familiar with the town of Brookline, we are a very diverse community. In particular, we have a large populations of people who speak both dialects of Chinese as well as Russian. And this is something that we're continuing to develop, as I'm sure you all are for your cafes, and we have to be mindful of going forward. For the cafe in particular, I do try to introduce people to those in similar situations, as I mentioned, based on gender, but also language as well. For example, we have a Cantonese-speaking couple who regularly attends the cafe, and I had been informed recently of a son who was bringing his mother, who actually did not speak any English at all, only Cantonese. So he was worried about her being able to follow along and enjoy herself. So knowing that this was happening, I asked the couple ahead of time if they would be comfortable if I sort of sat them together and introduced them, which they were. And when this actually happened, they realized they actually already knew each other from a similar venue that they attend, which was lovely. And through the programmatic piece of the cafe, I've learned that language is certainly important, but if you have the right program, you don't necessarily need everything translated per se, or people there to talk with, because there's a lot you can do through body language. For example, any exercise programs, laughter yoga, as I discovered from our memory cafe last month. Everyone can laugh, everyone can move, everyone can dance and follow along to music, even if it's in English. And that's what I found for this particular lady who did not speak any English. There was a huge smile on her face the entire time. She just really enjoyed herself, which was lovely. The Senior Center does have translations and translators available for many of our other programs. So I am hoping as a goal to somehow find a way to best incorporate this into the cafe. TBD, to be determined how this will best happen, but that's an idea I did have. And although not also done in Brookline yet, I do run a similar but smaller and more private program in Framingham. And I've done this through that program through having participants present on, let's say it's a particular holiday or cultural reference to them, things like Chinese New Year or Purim, things like that. And participants, the other participants have learned a lot from their peers presenting on these particular holidays, etc. What I'm wondering is if I'm going to be able to do this well for the cafe, where it's a bigger program and it's not as structured as my Framingham program is. But again, all to be determined and to be figured out, because I do think it's a very important thing that we touch on and continue to do for a lot of the cafes. So I'm going to turn it over to Ginny for a moment to talk about our camp.
Yeah, thank you, Jamie, and thanks, Beth. And I'm going to be looking at the screen as well.
So it turns out our speakers are in here. So I'm going to, you just go ahead, but I'm going to kind of move this here so that it picks up your voice.
Okay. So thanks, it's great to be here today. And I want to say I'm here from Goddard House Assisted Living on behalf of my colleagues, Lance Chapman and our therapist, Erica Curcio, who also help us run Camp Memory Connections. And I wanted to share the story and a little bit of the history about how we started up the camp from the perspective of its development, with an eye towards all of you perhaps getting interested in creating your own memory camp. And lastly, because for me, it's been an incredible learning experience. When I began, I did not have much experience in working with people who were living with memory loss. So I'll share parts of that as we go as well. And if you look at the timeline, it goes from 2013, well, really up until today, in 2017 when our camp began. And so it didn't happen overnight. The camp took about 4 or 5 years to really get rolling. And I'll be sharing how that happened with you in the next slides. So at 2013, at Goddard House, we started a farm on our memory support program, a farm that included organic vegetables and chickens. And that farm transformed that farm transformed our outdoor spaces from being purely decorative areas to being real, living, working, thriving learning centers, where it changed it for everybody. Our residents, visitors, staff, everybody could come out and participate in the farm, whether it was the functional aspects of the farm, planting, whether it was the sensory aspects of the farm, the smells, the taste, the fresh air, the scent of fresh basil, tomatoes, sunflowers. And I noticed, just from my own perspective, that this was producing a leveling effect. And by leveling effect, what that meant to me was that we were all in it together. We could all participate together, sometimes really without any distinction around who had dementia or not. The farm also evoked an array of creative responses. Songs, poetry, dancing just emerged spontaneously as people were outdoors engaging in the farm. And we had known what this leveling effect was for many years in our music therapy programs at Goddard House that we had been holding. And everyone, most of us, all of us are aware of that with music therapy, that we can all be there. We can all be there together on the same and shared common ground. And that's what leveling is to me. But we also knew that there was a lot more that could be done. And I really felt that I had a lot more to learn. I was the grant writer on the project. That's how I began. But I really felt it became almost my duty, my commitment as a human being to start to learn how to be more effective in my behavior, how to be able to change my behavior so that I could engage people who were living with dementia much more effectively. I also learned from some of our staff that I really had some blind spots, and I was grateful that they pointed them out to me. Our program director at the time would often say, "These individuals deserve so much. What can you do?" And so I really took that question to heart, and that inspired me moving forward. So the next year was what I call a kind of a seminal year in creative aging and in our field of aging. In 2014, Goddard House sent me to Washington, D.C. to participate on a panel at the National Center for Creative Aging Symposium. A national movement was gathering momentum to enrich life for people living with dementia, older adults, and caregivers through the arts. And ironically, it was there in Washington, not in Waltham, that I met you, Beth Salzberg, who was just beginning to initiate the dementia-friendly and memory cafe movements across Massachusetts and beyond. There I met in the above photograph with Donna Newman Bluestein, a dance movement therapist known to many of you for her work in memory cafes. At that conference, Dr. John Zeisel and Sean Caulfield of the I'm Still Here Foundation asked me if the town of Brookline might be interested, if the town of Brookline and Goddard House might be interested in partnering with them on an outdoor nature program for people living with dementia at parks and green spaces around Greater Boston. A piece that was missing in their own extensive programming that they had been pioneering for years through the I'm Still Here Foundation. And then, quite suddenly, just by chance, representatives from the city of Seattle, Washington, asked if they could meet with me at that conference to ask a little bit about our farm. Well, it ended up that they told me about their Momentum movement that had been running for 7 years already, and that already included outdoor programs for older adults, including a brand new one, Camp Momentia, which was held at historic Camp Long, a fort on Seattle's west side. So back home, that same year, 2014, all of our partners, local partners, Brookline, I'm Still Here Foundation, Goddard House, we gathered together and we started nature adventures in our own backyard. You know, think of it as a veritable outdoor memory cafe. Each program also had a social luncheon built into it, but we, for 3 years, every month from April through October, we would meet at outdoor spaces like Allendale Farm in Jamaica Plain, like Habitat, which is an Audubon Preserve Refuge in Belmont, Massachusetts. One moment, please. That's okay, I can wait till I'm done, too, because I won't need a card.
You keep going and I'll just.
Habitat, which is, as I said, an outdoor Audubon Society preserve in Belmont, Massachusetts. And we offered people wonderful opportunities to explore the outdoors, build friendships, and to offer basic dementia-friendly tips and training to ourselves, to park rangers, farmers, and tour guides in the community. And at that time, right, Jamie, we began to kind of ask ourselves, why can't we have a camp too? I'm an expressive arts therapist by training, although for a long time it was a very small part of my work at Goddard House. And I was often frustrated as a supervisor for students from Lesley University in expressive arts therapies, that there were not art programs out there that offered people who were living, particularly with mid to later stage dementia, opportunities to have art experiences through which they could effectively engage and then produce results that were satisfying to them, results that did not look like kid stuff. In Washington, I met Dr. Elizabeth Locon, a teaching artist whose abstract art program, Opening Minds Through Art, for people who were living with dementia, was just stunning in its results. The program was designed to empower artists every step of the way. I took her training at Miami University in Oxford, Ohio that year as part of my effort to do better, and it's been one of the most rewarding experiences in my career. The results of OMA are astonishing with its leveling effect that completely bypasses dementia. The artists uniformly produce works that match or exceed the skill level of those produced by us, the staff, and student interns. But most significantly, by design, OMA is not just about the artwork. It's about the bridge it builds across generations in the pairing of each artist with a volunteer through the love and regard that it cultivates for everyone involved in the program. So with Jamie's Memory Cafe up and running, and got a full array of arts and nature programs at Goddard House in full swing, our time to build the camp had come. So in 2017, it was launched. So I was the instigator, but it quickly became clear that you, Jamie, and my colleague, Lance Chapman, were the ones who wanted to lead it. Why was that? Jamie and Lance were both camp people. You both had attended summer camps throughout your childhood and were camp counselors as teens. That says a lot about you today. And you know, you even mentioned at one point that had you not become a social worker, you had been thinking about starting your own camp.
Absolutely. So just to give you all a little overview about the camp, it takes place at Lars Anderson Park Picnic Shelter. It's actually owned by the Brook Island Recreation, so we book that through them, and they're great to work with. They take care of the trash in the bathrooms, all of those important elements that we don't want to have to worry about the day of. As backup, though, we do have the senior center available in case of severe weather, which unfortunately we did have to use in our second year. Thank goodness it wasn't the first year. We do get the same participants that attend the cafe. We also get a large group who comes from Goddard House, as well as another partner of both Goddard House and the Senior Center, Hebrew Senior Life Center Community Senior Housing locations. We also get participants as well who are not known to any of those three organizations, which is lovely. And I think that's why we end up getting, and it's funny that we've gotten the same number every year, 42, a combination of 42 both participants and care partners annually. And of course, that doesn't include us as the staff, as well as our volunteers, which equals to be around 15 plus. So it's been a large and wonderful event every year. We do, when people arrive, we do have clear parking facilities available, as well as a sign at the gate to point in the direction of the shelter, as it's a little far off from where the actual parking is. And what's nice is our volunteers and our staff are welcoming folks at both the entrance where the parking lot is, as well as closer to the shelter itself, and are available to help people acclimate and settle in at the picnic tables. And we do have snacks available for some of the early attendees. Jenny loves the ants on a log that we have, the little celery sticks with peanut butter and raisins. Very popular. We do, in terms of the schedule, we have had to modify that over time. But generally, from 11 to 11:20, we have a welcome with a music therapist that Goddard House has generously provided. And we tend to use the music therapy both at the beginning as well as the end. We feel like it's a nice welcome, but also a nice closure for that. We also have from 11:20 to 12, we have an art therapy program. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, the program has changed through the years. We've sometimes used group projects to create large-scale. We'll show you some slides of that large-scale art projects. And then we realized about a year ago that the campers wanted to take their projects home. And so we needed enough for everybody. And Erica Curcio developed kind of like a beautiful cloth wind chime project that we implemented this past year. And indeed, everybody did have a chance to take their artwork home with them. And as Jamie, you have yours in your office.
Yes, exactly. I would have brought it to the meeting today had we held it with other participants here. So at noontime, we do have lunch, for a half an hour. Again, the Goddard House provides their chef a beautiful display of sandwiches and salads for people. We also provide snacks, chips, and we are able to provide both gluten-free and kosher options for those folks who attend as well in terms of the snacks. And of course, drinks, things like lemonade, iced tea, anything you could think of that's sort of summery is available. At 12:30, we have a word game. Originally, we actually, the first year, had a haiku guest artist, a haiku poet. And this was nice, but we've actually found we could do that ourselves through various means of doing a word game. For example, we've done a big word, little word, where we've written the long camp memory connections on a board and had people try to get words out of that, smaller words, 3 letters or more, out of larger camp memory connections word. And that's been a lot of fun. And the second year we did a camp ABCs where people would actually use words about camp that start with A, B, C, etc. And then share with the group what they came up with. We did this in teams. Last year, we divided the shelter in half, and we did half and half, so 2 teams against each other. So at 12:45, Goddard House's chef, this is a highlight, has a blowtorch that he puts on s'mores to actually make. Yes, exactly. Not a big one, but it's a lot of fun for participants to watch and then, of course, enjoy. And then, as I mentioned, we also close with another round of music therapy. And I didn't mention before, but the music therapy songs are folky in nature, very campy in nature. Everything is very themed around summer and camp and that type of thing. And what's nice about the music therapy is people will spontaneously burst into song and dance, and we have a conga line around the shelter.
Now I see where the dance comes from the memory cafe. Jamie, I wanted to mention something that's just to elaborate briefly on that. You also collaborated with Brookline Parks and Recreation as one of our partners. But one thing that's been so important to the camp is what we initially called mapping out the space. And it's so important in outdoor areas in terms of everything, including where restrooms are, the grade of the land, and how the distance between places. And we really mapped that, you really mapped that out and wrote that down as a means to kind of evaluate and see where we might run into difficulty. So I wanted to pass that along, to recommend it to anybody who might be trying to establish any kind of an outdoor program. And Dr. Zeisel's group had helped us with that previously, and as well as an organization called Walk Boston.
So in terms of the financial piece of this, each organization takes responsibility for different parts of it. And that's been a great collaboration in terms of being able to do that. And of course, because we're working together, we do have a lot of planning meetings in advance to figure all of that out. And actually, one year we were thankful to get a grant from the Brookline Community Foundation, which did help supplement some of our funding. But I think people power outweighs the budget expenses, which is really helpful in terms of the amount of staff and volunteers who participate, which is lovely. In terms of advertising, similar outlets to the cafe in terms of the newsletter and the Brookline tab. And what's nice about the camp is we're able to do a general outreach to outside of just Brookline. I mean, similar to other cafes, I didn't mention this before, but the Brookline Cafe is welcome to people outside of Brookline, but similar to the camp as well. And I feel like we do get a lot of people from very much outside of Brookline who come as well to that because it is at the different location.
It's more than just an event, too. It's taken on a festival feel. We kind of consider it a holiday in August.
Exactly.
And I'll just mention, if I can, this is Beth, that when it comes time for Camp Memory Connections, I think all the cafes in the area advertise to our participants that you have this program available, because it's so unique and it is just this one-time gathering. So I think it's something really nice for people who go to different memory cafes to be able to come and participate.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And thank you all who might be on this call who do that for us. We're very appreciative. So we do have the same volunteers who normally help with the cafe. And of course, as I mentioned, the amount of staff between both agencies has been lovely. And we have also had some different organizations and agencies who've had people come to volunteer for the day as well, really just to see what it's like. But similarly to the cafes, we don't have them just observe. They're there to actually participate and be a part of the day. And I would say in particular this past year, those folks were really helpful and really into it. You could tell they were really having a good time. In terms of evaluation, again, similarly through observation, verbal feedback, we've gotten a lot of great feedback from folks after every year of doing it. In particular, I mentioned this quote here that you can see on your screens from a participant from the first year, a care partner who brought her husband with memory loss. You can tell just from reading that she really, they really enjoyed themselves and really made great connections with other folks who were there. In terms of challenges, as you can imagine, weather is the biggest one. Every year, I mean, even the morning of, we're like, oh my goodness, is it going to happen? Because as you can imagine, for those of you who are in New England, you never know what the weather's going to be like. Even if the day before it says it's going to be one thing, it could change within a matter of hours, even the day of. And unfortunately, we did have to contend with that in our second year, which is why we had to have it at the senior center. And of course, even though it predicted horrible thunderstorms, it ended up being sunny that afternoon. So, of course, but it is what it is, and we just try to accommodate. I will say the shelter is covered, so we would be able to accommodate if there was just some general rain. But if there is any predictions of thunderstorms or any severe rainstorms, we would move it in that case. There's, of course, transportation challenges. In particular, I have the senior center van and bus who are able to bring people to and from the senior center. And unfortunately, if one of the drivers is out sick or on vacation, or we've had the van actually break down one year, the week of, those are things we have to contend with as well. In the senior center is lucky that we do have use of Uber and Lyft concierge program that the staff can use, which has been helpful as well as a generality for us. Of course, mobility issues are also a factor. Unfortunately, we did have an almost fall this past year, which was, thank goodness, prevented from happening. But again, as Ginny mentioned, with the terrain, we do have to be mindful of the different terrain that's there. There is actually a tiny step down from the stone shelter to the ground, which we do have to let folks know about. And then, of course, with any event, there's always logistical factors to contend with in terms of challenges. But again, benefits outweigh the challenges, and I'm sure you agree. Having people being able to meet their peers is just wonderful. The smiles, laughs, humor, conversation, the creativity, and just being outdoors on a nice day.
There's a real feel to it.
Yeah, exactly.
In a lot of ways. And I also wanted to say that this year we had a front page story in our local newspaper, which I think is a tribute to the way that, at least slowly, that stigma is breaking down. And we're very proud of that.
And one thing we are considering for the future that we've had some feedback from time to time is perhaps having some break time where people can just do a little light exercise, either in the shelter or little walks around the area. Folks have done this on their own if they just need some space, and the park is huge, so people can certainly do this as they please. But we might actually try to incorporate this somehow, even just 5 minutes here or there, to be able just to have, as Beth did earlier, a little stretch break for everybody, since it is sort of a jam-packed day. And it's just some advice for duplication for those of you who are looking to do this yourselves. It's really important just to adapt to the environment you have and your local resources. We're very lucky in Brookline to have what we have, as I'm sure you all are for your communities. So take advantage of that. And especially take advantage of your partnerships. Don't reinvent the wheel. We're very lucky to be able to work with each other. And again, I also want to make note of our Center Communities of Brookline, who have a lot of participants who come as well. They actually provided last year for the first time their van to bring some of their participants, which made it a little easier in terms of the senior center van being reserved for our non-center communities residents to be able to come. So that was very helpful. And of course, Goddard House, you have your van as well, who bring your folks. So that has been great.
Every year has been different, and
Yeah.
we learn a lot of new things every year as it evolves.
Absolutely. And just some pictures to give everybody an idea here. This was from our first year. And did you want to know about the art?
Yeah, so this is a gigantic art project based on Opening Minds Through Art. It's 4 foot by 4 foot project that we did four or five of these pieces. The idea for it came from Lance Chapman, our assistant director at Goddard House, who's there in the picture behind me. And he said, "It's camp. Why not think big? Big is fun." And so we did, and we were shocked ourselves by the results.
And I know some of these are kind of dark. Obviously, we have to contend with the light for a lot of our pictures. But it gives you a visualization of the space that we have available. Unfortunately, there's nothing we can do about the giant barbecue right in the middle, which sort of blocks some of the eye line for seeing across. But again, people are able to accommodate it as best they can.
We thought we were going to be really missing out when Seattle told us that the centerpiece of their camp was our barbecue. But we really haven't missed anything. We serve sandwiches, and it's just great. we didn't feel like there's any lack because of that. So that's where we say, like, be unique, be true to your own resources, and it'll work.
Absolutely. I mean, there is, as I mentioned, a barbecue there, but it would just be way too complicated and risky, I would think, to be able to use that, especially with how many people we get. You can see Lance actually brings drums, which are helpful for folks using the music therapist as well, which has been great. So this is our second year in 2018. You can see in the corner at the bottom the word game that we did. And you want to describe the art?
Just briefly, sure. This was, thanks. This was an art project that we did again as a team with I think it was 2 foot by 2 foot primed acrylic canvases, primed with acrylics. And then we mixed acrylic paint and pouring medium, which gives the paint an effect. If you think it's a little bit like motor oil when it gets wet and you dry a puddle in the driveway. And basically there's a viscosity that when you simply, all you need to do is a 4 or 5 person member team tilts the canvas, producing the results that we see here. It's amazing and fun.
And you can see some of the words here were used as part of our word game. What people had used for their camp ABCs, which was just lovely commentary. Again, some of the feedback that we get about the event. And this was last year. We're thankful to be back in the shelter again. And you can see, you briefly described the art project from this past year, but you wouldn't mind going into detail again.
These were created really with the idea that campers take them home, and it's a beautiful idea of using cloth that's simply tied on a hoop, and lovely colors, and people can have them for a long time.
Again, just some more pictures to give you an idea. That was our word game below at the bottom. And on the bottom right there, you'll see a gentleman and his wife and their caregiver who they went on a brief walk, as I mentioned, on their own. So this sort of, gave us the idea of maybe incorporating this for this year. So we'll see how that goes. And you have a contact information there, as well as Erica, the art therapist. If anybody has any questions, certainly feel free to reach out to us directly.
Great. Thank you so much, Ginny and Jamie. You can head over here maybe. Yeah, just so that any of us can be heard. So we have about 5 minutes if anybody has comments or questions for Jamie or Ginny, or wants to share something that you're doing that's similar.
I have a question about the senior center. We're in San Antonio, and we have a memory cafe that's doing quite well, and we've started the process of a network going in partnership with our local Alzheimer's Association, and through that we're trying to grow memory cafes modeling off of you all with the Percolator. But we had originally started our memory cafe in a senior center, and we found that because there were so many people who were not currently living with dementia or caregiving for a person living with dementia, that the people who were coming into the senior center, which had the added barrier of not being accommodating to early onset or younger onset because the age restriction of 65 and up to even be a member of the senior center. And we had all these issues. And then the people living with dementia and the family caregivers of people living with dementia stopped coming because they felt like there were too many people who didn't necessarily resonate with them in the experience. So can you speak to kind of how you found balance within that in the senior center setting?
So can I ask, just you say it's limited obviously to folks who are over a certain age, but would there be any exception to that just for the cafe that you think you would be
right? And we ended up at one of the locations working with them to open it up, and that was our responsibility in our outreach and promotion. But they were fairly firm for the most part. They weren't the most accommodating to people. They kind of came up with this list of rules and all that stuff, and in trying to maintain good partnership. But that wasn't necessarily the issue, though, because there aren't that many people with younger onset. Not saying that there's not a need, but the issue didn't come up more than maybe 1 or 2 times where we had to kind of navigate that. The real issue was that the senior centers typically are people who are already socially engaged and inclusive. They're sort of active members of their communities, generally speaking, not every single one, but they're able to go to a senior center. They already have social relationships. We felt like, and then we moved it to a different location. We ended up partnering with a program, a nonprofit that provides free transportation to homebound seniors. And now we found that the percentage of people living with dementia and caregivers is a lot higher than the people who are not currently experiencing. So I just kind of am curious to see if that's been at all an issue, or do you predominantly have people who are living with dementia and caregivers, or do you have more people who are just interested, like you mentioned?
I would say it's a mix, and that varies even month to month for us. But generally, we're a pretty welcoming community. I mean, not to toot our own horn, but I think people, everybody knows someone who has memory loss.
Right.
Whether it's a mother, sister, etc., and they want to be able to give back and have them be part of the community. And I think it does take time too. I know initially we actually did have an education event, which actually Beth was a part of many years ago, and just in regards to memory loss, and we had a panel discussion, and I think that did help with getting the word out about the cafe, but also taking away a lot of that stigma and judgment about it. So that might be something. It's just like a general education, that not necessarily in conjunction with the memory cafe, but maybe just more focused on what is memory loss and how to be more inclusive and how to understand it a bit.
Absolutely. That's what we ended up doing. We sort of traded off. We started focusing more on education in the senior center around dementia, and then moved our memory cafe to a more community-based setting that could kind of address those barriers. And since then, it's been doing quite well. So I was just curious to see if you had the same problem. So thank you.
Well, thanks. Yeah, I wish it weren't more accepting in all communities, certainly. I mean, as I said, I think we're pretty lucky in terms of the inclusivity.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah. I'm just noticing this chat from Amy, which seems to go to the same issue in some ways, balancing the needs of people without memory loss attending so that they do not, quote unquote, dominate the programming or get frustrated with the individuals living with dementia while maintaining the dignity of those with memory impairment. And Amy asked, what was the messaging for the program? So that's an interesting question. So when you put out your flyers, how do you phrase it so that people know what the purpose of the program is in a way that feels dignified and inclusive?
I mean, I can't quote word for word, but it's pretty similar to what a lot of other memory cafes here in New England have done. I will say, not that I copied you, but I certainly have similar wording and, to what Beth puts out for hers or others have put out from their, again, some of the initial cafes back from 2014. Basically, even if people call me, I'll briefly say it's a program for people with memory loss and or their caregivers to come together and meet other people going through the same thing, but under a social guise. It's a party. It's a way for people to connect with one another and form friendships both within the program, but also outside of the program as well. And it's just really laid back, and people don't have to even admit that they have memory loss at all. When you look at the room, you wouldn't necessarily, I still don't know really, unless I know them through other sources through the senior center, really who has memory loss and who doesn't. That's really what it's supposed to be about it, in my opinion.
And Amy, another thing that helped us in terms of the camp program is that the camp replaces the memory cafe. For that, the camp is the memory cafe only expanded during August. So that kind of lent to like kind of a natural affiliation and association with the memory cafes as well. And I know for the camp, it's in our language. It's for people living with dementia.
I think that the language is important, and sometimes we use language that is not chosen because it's necessarily clinically accurate, but rather because we know that it is most likely to be inclusive of the people who might attend. So we all know that dementia is not just about memory loss, but the term memory loss, especially in some cultural communities, is much more accepted than the term dementia. So very often programs will choose to use that phrase or something similar because they feel it'll open the door for people to participate. And I'm seeing Amy's follow-up comment here, messaging to the regulars who attend, and I'm thinking back to one of our recent Percolator meetings when we were very fortunate to have a presentation by Katie Brandt, who is a specialist working with people with frontotemporal degeneration. And we do have a recording of that meeting, so if anybody missed it and wants to watch it on the Percolator webpage, you can do so. But Katie made such a helpful comment. She was talking about how to handle it if you have participants who might be really disinhibited and maybe vocalize during programs, or be moving around, be loud in a way that is out of step with the activity. And she suggested just acknowledging it and saying all responses are welcome. So not ignoring it, but actually acknowledging it, and that really sends a signal to everybody in the room that this is fine, this is not a problem, we are all here together, we are all welcome. I found that very helpful. So I think no matter what the written messaging, it's something that we need to be prepared to do in the moment as facilitators.
I would include the volunteers in that as well. I would say a lot of the volunteers that I use have had some experience in their professional lives or otherwise working with folks with memory loss. So, and I think even if they haven't, for your volunteers, a little bit of training is helpful for that in terms of accommodating for folks and having some one-on-one time with folks who might be having a difficult day. Definitely use your volunteers. That's what they're there for, and they're great at what they do.
And I see some other comments here. Angela has shared what she puts in her brochure. It looks like her program is geared toward people with early stage dementia, which is true of some memory cafes, and others are for people at any stage. But whatever it is, you want to let people know what your program is about, and just to use language that is attuned to how people might perceive it. And I see Dave is here with us, who runs memorycafedirectory.com, which has been really helpful, providing a national directory so people can find cafes over the country, which is great. So is there any maybe one more question for Jamie and Ginny?
This is Susan again. I'd just like to put in a plug for camp. I loved hearing about your camp, and thank you for all those great pictures. But I would suggest that you all look at residential camps in your regions that serve perhaps children with disabilities. The Easter Seals often runs camps like this. We've been running a residential camp for families living with dementia for a couple of years now at a camp that we knew was serving children and families with autism. And we went to them a few years ago and said, well, do you think you could have a residential camp for families and people living with dementia? And it has been wonderfully successful and very positively received. We're there 3 nights and 2 full days. The camp is fully accessible. It's on a gorgeous lake in northern Wisconsin. And I would just suggest that there are camps around the country that probably are set up in a way that could accommodate people having dementia and care partners and their families. Our ages have ranged from 5 of a grandchild to 95. So I think that can happen in other places.
Thank you, Susan. That sounds like an incredibly rich and rewarding experience. If people want to know more about that, can they go to the Fox Valley Memory Project website? Okay, so that's the Fox Valley. Great.
And, yeah, and they're welcome to contact me directly.
Great, thank you. So that's Susan McFadden in Wisconsin, and you can look at the Fox Valley Memory Project website. So I want to really thank Ginny and Jamie for that wonderful presentation, which gives us so much food for thought. And I want to turn now, with the 15 minutes that we have left, to a more sobering topic. so much of what we've heard about today involves face-to-face, personal connection, spending time together, bringing groups together. And after all, that's what memory cafes are all about, is reducing social isolation. So we now find ourselves in this moment where we're being told, don't get groups together, and especially older adults and people who have chronic medical concerns are at risk. So I wanted to just spend a little time here, and I'm gonna just toggle back to the slides and do just a little bit of brainstorming. And also, you know, I was anticipating that we would only have time today to really get to the tip of the iceberg. So I would be more than glad to set up a conference call for the Percolator list in the next week or two to really spend a dedicated hour sharing and brainstorming together if folks think that would be helpful. So maybe during this conversation, I can sort of get a sense of interest in that. But how are cafes coping? This little photo here is from the JF&CS Memory Cafe last week, where we did decide to meet, and we had beautiful centerpieces of hand sanitizer and tissues on every table. And it was a very hard decision. It was a decision that came just days before Massachusetts ended up declaring a state of emergency. So everything has changed since our cafe last Friday. And I'm sure for many of you around the country, everything is changing day by day as well. So I'm wondering, are you canceling? Are you modifying? And Susan McFadden in Wisconsin and I had the chance to talk just a little bit about some of the ideas that this challenge might actually help us move forward. So the Fox Valley Memory Project is working with Kairos Alive's Dancing Heart program, which is based in the Twin Cities, Minneapolis area. And so they have been testing this program using Zoom with participants in several different programs. And I encourage you to go to the video link you see there and watch a 2-minute video, which really illustrates beautifully how it can look to do a dance program on Zoom. And Susan is on the line with us. So if folks have questions about that, I'm sure she'd be happy to speak to them. But I wanted to just flip to the next screen, which just kind of broadens the issue a little. You know, what are some of the ideas we could explore? Virtual cafes. Now, we know not everyone has Wi-Fi. We know not everyone is comfortable using a computer. Telephone. There's the program Derote in New York City, for example, which has wonderful adult learning programs and social programs, which are totally telephone-based. It seems like singing or discussion could work really well just using a phone. It also occurs to me, these kinds of programs, people can participate from all over. So if several of us around the country were starting to put together virtual programs and we had a way of sharing a calendar, then folks from any of our sites could participate. So that's kind of an upside. One other category we might think about is good old-fashioned cards or letters. I myself have this whole cadre of Memory Cafe volunteers who are now sad and frustrated, including from Brandeis University, where they've all been told they can't volunteer anymore this semester. So theoretically, I could task them making lovely cards and letters and sending them to our Memory Cafe guests. I don't know if Ann Basting is on the line. Ann, who is the originator of the Time Slips program. I think she was going to try to join us, but she's done amazing work through Meals on Wheels of sending what she calls beautiful questions out with Meals on Wheels recipients. So there are these wonderful, poetic, evocative questions, and then a volunteer will call and have a discussion with that person. So I just want to say, let's not despair. Let's try, since we have no choice but to deal with this, let's try to use this as an opportunity to develop approaches that actually could benefit many isolated people who physically haven't been able to come to our cafes. And let's collaborate. Let's try to work together. So that's what I had to say. So I'd love to just open it up to anyone who wants to share thoughts, ideas, worries, frustration. Swearing is allowed. I know we're all coping as best we can. And just make sure everybody's unmuted. There we go. So any thoughts?
Well, not to dominate if someone else wants to, but our program operates under an institutional umbrella, University of Texas, and we've been ordered to cancel all events, particularly working with older adults. So some of the smaller groups that are being able to meet, like the support group at the Alzheimer's Association, we were signing cards and things like that. So I'm considering arranging sort of smaller groups to meet on their own time and to collaborate with each other by connecting through email and phone, some of our regular members. But any ideas are welcome.
That's great. Thank you, Sarah.
Hi, Dave Wiedrich here. In the chat, I mentioned that I operate the Memory Cafe directory. And first off, I want to thank Beth for terrific collaboration. Massachusetts is the only state with whom I collaborate at this level. And we do our best to keep the Massachusetts listings in sync with the Memory Cafe directory listings. And that's working very well. So thank you, Beth, for that effort.
Thank you.
I've been thinking about this myself, so I'm really glad to see this question posed. And just a kind of a quick level set here. The Memory Cafe directory has nearly 900 listings now, and that includes mostly in the US, of course, but it also includes the United Kingdom, Canada, and Australia. And those are small numbers, but certainly growing. So I've been wondering how to not just be a static directory, although growing every week, but how to build in more inclusion. And I have to admit, I didn't think about the telephone part of it, but I've been thinking more about video. The two make perfect sense to consider both. So while I don't have an answer, I would like to offer the possibility of using the solid base of activity at Memory Cafe directory as potentially a place to be the source of these, call it online opportunities, telephone opportunities. And I think Beth made the comment about it's not just for people in our local communities, but people can reach out if they're a bit isolated from wherever they are. And since the Memory Cafe directory gets over 10,000 now visitors a month from all over the world, it might be a good place to house that information. Don't quite know how that would look yet, but wanted to at least plant that seed for consideration and see if that could be a valuable place to hold that information.
That's great. Thank you. I think that, it might be the kind of thing where we'd want to use an editable document, like a Google document that we could all contribute to, so that as people had programs, they listed them, and that might be something that you could link to, Dave.
Mm-hmm.
We probably don't want to put a whole lot of time and energy into formatting it and making it fancy and beautiful, because of course, we all hope there will come a time where we can go back to quote unquote normal. But there might be a great way to do that. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. And I might add, getting back to normal. This might be the new normal, but I think that the challenge of people not easily being connected with respect to a physical participation and maybe relying on the computer or the phone. You think about Massachusetts, okay, not a large state, but Massachusetts has the second largest number of memory cafes, second only behind Wisconsin. Be careful, Susan. And Alaska has, I think, just 2. So there's some issues there with respect to density, and potential remoteness, that we might find that this remote connection with people could have legs. So I just want to kind of throw that out there and not think of this necessarily as a short-term strategy, because it could be very valuable long-term.
Absolutely. Yeah. Any others in the last couple minutes that we have?
I agree with what you just said, Dave, and I think that this is an opportunity for us to figure out how we can invite more people to participate in this Memory Cafe movement that we've all started as a way of connecting people in a meaningful and joyful way. So I do think that there's a lot of promise in the technology, although I know that there are limitations with that too. But this is really going to have us thinking creatively about how we can stay connected with people who tend to be isolated in our society.
Agreed.
Well, I think that's a really nice theme to end on. And I do see in the chat box a couple of participants mentioning what a challenge this is for care partners who are really, really distressed about the cancellation of programs. You know, it's kind of ironic that the cancellation is to protect people, and yet it's also devastating to lose this social lifeline that really is the thing that for so many people brightens up their week or their month, and they really rely on. So I wonder, just head nods or waves, or if you want to chat me a comment, I'd love to get a sense, would there be interest in having a dedicated hour Zoom meeting in the next week or two to talk more about this issue and see how we might collaborate? Okay, I'm seeing.
Yes.
So I will, by early next week, or maybe this weekend, I'll send out a doodle poll and we'll find a time to do that. I see yes in the chat. That's great. So everyone put your thinking caps on. I think it's a paradigm shift. And to Dave and Susan's point, we can come out the other side better for this, because if we can develop some ways to reach people who really normally have not been able to access our programs, then that's something good to come out of this really devastating situation.
Excuse
so
me,
I
Beth.
want to just thank you all so much for the work that you do every day and for spending 2 hours here with us. And thank you for your patience with me as I fumbled my way through how to use the chat function and toggle from this or that. But you know, we make it work, right? So I think that's what we've all got to do going forward.
Beth.
And so look for the doodle poll from me.
Beth, excuse me, could I offer one more thing?
Yeah.
I've had a private chat with Angela Myers just a little bit ago, and I think it bears announcing to everyone, if anyone has listings that they want or need to have temporary changes made on Memory Cafe directory, the conversation had to do with temporarily suspending these operations during this time. If you'd like me to add any time-sensitive notes, you know, maybe a March meeting is canceled or whatever you'd like to show, I'm happy to do that. I normally try not to do too many of those kinds of updates, because times 900 listings, it gets a little onerous. But this is important, and if you have any kind of very time-specific edits and updates you'd like me to make, just drop me a note.
Thank you very much, Dave. Appreciate all the work that you put into maintaining the national directory. And so the Massachusetts directory, we put a banner up on there today, sort of at the top, which says, please make sure to contact the cafe coordinator to be aware of possible cancellations due to COVID-19. So
I will steal that idea.
Global message that hopefully will help. So yes, I will be making these slides available, and the recording should be available on the Percolator webpage within the next week or week and a half or so. So I want to give another huge thank you to Mary Beth Riedner and to Jenny Mazer and Jamie Jensen for their presentations, which were fabulous. And thank you all. Be well, wash your hands, be healthy, take care of yourselves, and we'll be in touch soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.